Hi, this is Brian Kim. I'm going to share with you case number 174 in the Best Way to Do Cataract Surgery series. This is a fairly soft lens and a toric lens. And so you're going to see how I'm able to beautifully illustrate and execute counterclockwise rotation of a toric lens. Now, if you told this to the company reps, they might gasp and say, "What are you doing? That's terrible. You're going to cause complications. You can only rotate the lens clockwise." Not so fast. That's not true. I've done this many, many times, and the concept is so clear. And I'll prove that to you in this case. So this is the eye. You can see this patient has a Bell's reflex. So this means that this eye is the right eye. You see I have really nice corneal marks, which I pre-placed. And you can see my video on that technique on a past video that I have on my channel. Holding the eye steady with the cotton tip and then using the corneal marker to help me center Phacoemulsification. Holding the eye steady with the cotton tip once again. Making my paracentesis incision flat to iris plane, first on the right side and then the left side. I'm asking the patient to look down here, using the cotton tip to hold the eye, asking the patient not to move, and you have a nice flat approach for my paracentesis incision, which will seal quite nicely. This is intracameral lidocaine, and then some intracameral epinephrine, and then some dispersive viscoelastic to coat the corneal endothelium and flatten the anterior capsule. You can see this is probably a high myope, deep chamber, big pupil. And so again, in these cases, it's even more important to make sure you position the lens right, because in these cases, there's a higher risk that the lens can turn. So this is a triplanar corneal incision. I make a vertical groove, place the blade into the deep part of the groove, tunnel, and then I enter. I'm holding the eye with the cannula because this patient does have a little bit of a Bell's reflex. I switch to my sharp tip Halti Burkhardt's. I go ahead and puncture the center, pull down towards me, and I'm nudging a little bit to the right so I can start my flap. Again, I'm using the corneal mark that I made as a gauge to set the diameter for my rhexis. Going around circumferentially, again, big eye, deep chamber, but I have great control, no overlocking with this forceps because it has such a thin and small profile. Again, I'm trying to follow the corneal mark. When you have such a big pupil, it can be deceiving as far as how to center and size a rhexis. And the tendency is actually making it a little bit too big because you have lost that frame of reference. It's such a big pupil, but that's why marking the cornea is so helpful. So this is a Capsulorhexis hydrodissection technique. I place a cannula under the rhexis edge contra-incisionally, get a nice wave, decompress on the left side, sweeping along the anterior capsule on that side, doing the same thing on the right side as well, and then the lens begins to spin. Irrigating the surface of the eye, adjusting my sleeve. And with these big pupils, you have to be mindful of reverse pupillary block as well. We'll see if there is any here. Go in with irrigation off to minimize Descemet's trauma. Releasing here some reverse pupillary block that I saw there, so that's good. Removing the surface epinuclear material, placing the chopper around the rhexis edge, rotating the phacoemulsification vertically subincisionally, bringing the instruments together, and it crushes the lens completely in half as a cheese wire. Placing the chopper around the right heminucleus, pulling the century towards the phacoemulsification, cheese wiring the right heminucleus. You can see beautiful division of the lens, lifting that first quadrant up with some vacuum. Rotating that second quadrant, getting around the lens once again with the chopper, and I'm just going to further amputate that adhesion there. Beautiful illustration of cross chop. So I'm going to show that one more time in slow motion. I have my hand pronated, lifting the iris to release that reverse pupillary block before we get started. And once I've done that, I'm going to remove the surface epinuclear material. I have the chopper already pronated with my hand. I'm going to lead off with the tip, sliding underneath the epinuclear ridge, sliding, and then turning vertical once I'm within the Capsulorhexis, tilting the phacoemulsification vertically subincisionally, bringing the instruments together. They're fairly deep in the same plane. Again, the elbow of the chopper is still at the surface of the lens. That's your guide there. I'm able to fracture the lens so easily and efficiently through this soft lens like a cheese wire, pronating my hand once again, getting that chopper under the rhexis edge, hooking the peripheral lens, pulling it centrally toward the phaco-tip and fracturing the right heminucleus. Again, the phaco-tip is acting like a cutting board, a chopping block, and it bisects that right heminucleus so efficiently and easily, using some vacuum to pop that first quadrant up out of the bag, and it just kind of dissolves. Again, this is a fairly soft lens. But again, I'm trying to illustrate how easy it is to cut this lens. Now, some people might just pop this lens into the anterior chamber using a flip technique. The rationale is it's a super, big eye, deep chamber. Why not do that? But to me, that doesn't require any skill. And you can do that, but you might bump up the lens pieces on the corneal endothelium. It just doesn't really make sense. You can't do that technique for all cases. So why can't you use a technique that does require some skill and practice doing it? You can see I did another cross chop, beautiful illustration, and I was able to sever the adhesions between that second quadrant and the rest of the lens, and nice separation, very well controlled. All the maneuvers are within the bag, and really this is the best case to practice double chopping, cross chop, and mechanical fraction, because it's so easy to cut the lens pieces. So the concepts are much easier. When they get denser, then you have to really, really do a good job in using those opposing forces. So again, placing the chopper around that second heminucleus, pulling it centrally toward the phaco-tip, and then cutting that lens in half, again, like a cheese wire, so confidently. Again, the phaco-tip is acting like a cutting board in that moment. Grabbing that third quadrant up, and then it emulsifies very easily, and then same for that fourth quadrant. Again, the bag is so empty, it just kind of comes out very easily there. So I take the chopper out, push BSS in, take the phaco-tip out. I go in with the I&E handpiece. I release the reverse pupillary block with the I&E handpiece. I start sub-incisionally removing the cortical material. And again, these machines are so efficient. You're able to pull this cortical material so easily, but you always want to start from anterior to posterior. Switch to polish mode. I'm going to polish underneath the rhexis edge. I'm adjusting my sleeve there. I was sitting a little funny. Polishing underneath the rhexis edge, going around circumferentially. And so again, remember, why do toric lenses rotate? And I think it's because the bag is so big. And at the end of the case, if you don't adjust reverse pupillary block, because when you're hydrating your incisions, it causes reverse pupillary block. That's what it does. And when it does that, that causes this tremendous overfilling of the bag. And so I do think that that's actually a part of the reason why this happens. And so, some people have come up with this concept of using a CTR or whatever. I really haven't had that problem, and I suspect it's because of that. If you finish the case and you just come out and you've maintained that reverse pupillary block configuration with a toric lens, I think the bag is super overinflated when that happens. Because remember, the anterior chamber pressure is so much higher than the posterior chamber pressure. And the bag is really still the most posterior component of the anterior chamber, because the iris is tamponaded on the capsule, and then now that bag is super inflated. So I think that's what's going on. So you have to disengage reverse pupillary block at the very end of the case for these cases. So I'm pulsing into the subincisional capsular fornix. And then again, I'm disengaging the continuous irrigation. You saw that maneuver when I went in and out real quick. And then I'm pushing cohesive viscoelastic to fill the anterior chamber in the bag. And then once it's formed, then I take the I&E handpiece out. And I do it that way for better chamber control and also to minimize OVD egress. I'm polishing underneath the rhexis edge here on the left side first, and then I'll do that on the right side. I want to remove all the lens epithelial cells. So again, this is my theory. I'm not quite sure. I just know that I haven't really noticed any problems when I do toric lenses, even with big eyes. And I've heard case reports of people having trouble with the lens rotating, which really doesn't make sense. And I think it is because of what I just said. It's because they're leaving the eye in reverse pupillary block. So I place the lens into the capsular bag. I go in with the I&E handpiece with irrigation off, activating irrigation, tilting and getting underneath the lens, rotating at 90 degrees clockwise, removing all the viscoelastic from within the bag. Now you can see here, I tilted and rotated the lens 90 degrees, which is my normal technique, but this means I'm totally off axis here. So you see I'm polishing underneath the rhexis edge here, but again, I'm more in kind of like a with the rule, and I need to go the other way. I need to go 120 degrees. And so I could go with what the company would say and go and rotate it clockwise, but I'm going to show you just to make a point that I can rotate this counterclockwise. But again, before we do anything, you got to remove all the viscoelastic from within the bag and the entire eye. Why? Because if you leave the viscoelastic and then try to position the lens and then remove it later, well, it's going to change the position of the lens. It makes no sense. So take all the viscoelastic out because it can disrupt your final lens position. You can see I'm going to low mag and I'm using the Toric marker to line up where I'm supposed to be at 120 degrees. And now I'm using the Maltzman. See, I'm using infusion, active infusion, and the eye is now ballooned up, okay? The capsular bag is ballooned wide open, okay? It's taut and big, and therefore it's not touching the lens, okay? And I'm able to very carefully and confidently rotate the lens, again, nudging the optic, using a two-handed technique with the Maltzman and the eye in a handpiece, and I was able to place the lens now in the 120-degree location. So again, line it up, and that's really good. So it's 120 degrees, okay? 120 degrees. I went a little bit too far, so I'm just nudging it just a little bit. But again, I'm doing this with active infusion. If you have active infusion, the bag is not holding the lens, okay? The bag is not holding the lens. If you have active infusion, the capsular bag is very, very inflated. So it's not touching the lens at all. And so therefore you have exquisite control and confidence. You'll be able to rotate the lens without causing any traction on the bag or the zonules. Now, if you try to do all those maneuvers and just nudge it with the eye completely collapsed, like for example, now here with the eye collapsed, if you try to nudge the lens, all you're doing is nudging on the zonules. It makes no sense. The only time you should really nudge the eye is when you have infusion going on. So again, infusion going on, you can use the eye in a handpiece to position the lens. You can use a second instrument, but the key is you need full infusion. It opens up the bag. There's no traction on the bag. You can position the lens, and once you lock it into place, you push BSS in, take the eye in a handpiece out. It locks the position, quickly hydrate the incisions, protecting the eye from collapsing, because I do think also when you collapse the eye, you can have rotation of the lens. So you want to prevent collapse of the chamber, and also again, you want to address that reverse pupillary block, right? And in this case, I don't see reverse pupillary block right now, so I think we're probably in a good place. But if you saw reverse pupillary block in the case, you would have to release it before you finish the case. It's very, very important. So again, I check one more time. The lens is in perfect position at 120. Again, you saw my counterclockwise rotation technique using the Maltzman, but more importantly, maintaining active infusion to keep that bag wide open so it doesn't cause any traction on the bag or the zonules. And this patient had an excellent refractive outcome employing this technique, the counterclockwise rotation technique, as I've shown you here. So I hope this was helpful to you, and I thank you for your attention.